Great. Welcome to the Emmanuel Chapel COVID-19 webinar. This is the fifth in a series of virtual meetings which seek to bring you great comfort in a time of fear, anxiety, and grief. This is part of Emmanuel Chapel's efforts to bring relief to as many people as possible during this time. Please use the question and answer button to answer your questions, as we are eager to engage with the audience. Now, the aim of today's panel is to discuss the present response, the near-term obstacles, and the potential future outcomes Nigeria's state governments are facing, given the global COVID-19 pandemic's impact on Nigeria's fiscal space. Many states must now make trade-offs between immediate benefits, which improve population health, and long-term benefits, which encourage economic prosperity. This discussion will shed light on how state governments are, first, planning in the face of uncertainty, and secondly, communicating future expectations to the general public. My name is Chini Ogunro, and I will be serving as your moderator for this discussion. We have a phenomenal panel of 4 state governors who need no introduction. However, I will provide a very brief background on each panelist. First to be mentioned from our panel is His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Ekiti State, Dr. Kayode Fayemi. Dr. Fayemi also holds the position of Chairman of the Governors Forum, the Central Clearinghouse of Leaders of Nigeria's subunits. He was the former Minister of Mines and Steel Development from 2015 through 2018. During his tenure as minister, he concurrently served as chairman of the governing board of the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Welcome. The second governor on today's panel is His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Edo State, Mr. Godwin Obaseki. For over 30 years, Mr. Obaseki excelled in his chosen career, becoming an internationally renowned expert in investment banking, asset management, and securities trading. He established AfriInvest West Africa Limited, then SecTrust, in 1995, leading the firm to numerous achievements, including being appointed correspondent stockbroker for Nigeria by the IFC in 1995. Welcome. The third governor for today's panel is His Excellency, the Executive Governor of Lagos State, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu. Mr. Sanwo-Olu was appointed Acting Commissioner for Economic Planning and Budget from 2004 to 2005, and became the Substantive Commissioner for Commerce and Industry in 2007. Mr. Sanwo-Olu was appointed the Chief Executive Officer of the Lagos State Property Development Corporation in 2016. Welcome. Our fourth governor completing today's panel is Engineer Abdullahi Sule, Governor of Nasarawa State. Engineer Sule was the former Group Managing Director of Dangote Sugar Refinery PLC, the second largest sugar refinery in the world, and the co-founder of Sadiq Petroleum Nigeria Limited in Lagos, and was made the Managing Director and CEO. Under his leadership, the company won a bid to acquire African Petroleum PLC, and he became the CEO of AP in 2001. Welcome. We would like to give a deep thanks to the Reverend Dr. Koyin Ajayi and the members of Emmanuel Chapel for putting together this amazing panel, and we look forward to a fruitful discussion. All protocols duly observed. Now, the title of this webinar is The State of States. Therefore, before we dig into the details of today's discussions, it's important that we truly set the stage appropriately. We should take a few brief minutes to discuss where are we now, and a great place to begin is with the numbers. Now, in our next slide, we can see what COVID-19 looks like in Nigeria. As of this morning, we have over 5,000 confirmed cases nationwide. The states with the highest number of confirmed cases are Lagos, Kano, and FCT. However, cases alone does not tell a complete story. Nigeria has only performed just over 30,000 tests for COVID-19. Now, if we go on to the next slides and we look at our counterparts in other parts of Africa, we see that South Africa had, as of May 3rd, performed over 260,000 tests, providing them a fuller picture of what their over 7,000 cases were. And that was at the beginning of this month. So that's South Africa. If we move on to our counterparts in Ghana in the next slide, we can see what our West African neighbors are doing. We see that they just have just over 5,500 cases across the entire country. And as of yesterday, Ghana had performed over 160,000 tests, and their death rate is far lower than the death rate we're seeing here in Nigeria. Now, in our next slide, we see that when we're examining the impact of COVID-19 in terms of economic impact, jobs are the first thing that most people are concerned about. An April 17th article by McKinsey & Company proffered potential solutions to save lives and livelihoods. So let's look at the projections for jobs and incomes. Of the 450 million workers across all of Africa, about 150 million are formally employed and 300 million are informally employed. Now, of the 150 million formally employed, 10%, or about 9 to 18 million, are projected to lose their jobs. About 30 to 35 million will have their salaries reduced through lower hours or lower pay. Now, of the 300 million in the informal sector, we can see that there's a heavy toll being paid, with over 100 million total informal jobs at risk. About 35 million of the vulnerable jobs are in informal sales and service jobs in the wholesale and retail sectors. Now, fortunately, the majority of Africa's informal sector workers are within subsistence agriculture and are less likely impacted. So, in total, about 1/3 of all jobs, whether formal or informal, are currently already experiencing negative changes or will be at risk in the very near future. Now, when we talk about jobs, we must certainly bring up lockdowns and the reduction of movements due to social distancing requirements. In our next slide, we'll see a poll by Lagos state government that recently asked Twitter users, should the state government impose another lockdown or not? As of this morning, about 49% are in favor of lockdown and 41% are opposed to another lockdown. That's, of course, an informal poll with everyday people from around the world, mostly in Nigeria. What do the professional economists say about lockdown? Well, according to them, it really depends. In our next slide, we'll look at a study out of Yale University, which examined the benefits of lockdowns in different types of countries. Now, this study concluded that social distancing measures are predicted to save a large number of lives in high-income countries, such as the United States, in part because countries like Nigeria have a younger population, which is less susceptible to COVID-19. In our next slide, we'll see what the relative economic value of mitigation policies are in each country. The same study further determined that the economic value generated by equally effective social distancing policies is estimated to be 240 times larger for the United States or 70 times larger for Germany, as compared to the value created in low-income countries like Nigeria. So that is the relative state of affairs at the highest level. But let's really begin by connecting with you, the audience. You will see shortly on your screens a poll asking you about how you feel on economic lockdowns. The poll is going to ask, do you think Nigerian states should impose lockdowns in efforts to curb the spread of COVID-19? Now, if you are one of our Zoom participants, we ask you to please take a few moments and click yes, impose lockdowns, click no, do not impose lockdowns, or click not sure if you are simply not sure. And we'll use the results of this poll, ideally, to inform the governors as we move on to the formal questions that we have. Again, I'd like to remind the audience to please use the Q&A button for your own questions as we go through the formal questions with the governors. Now, in a moment, we'll show what the results of this quick poll are. Do you think Nigerian states should impose lockdowns in efforts to curb the spread of COVID-19? Yes, no, or you're not sure? As you can see, 52% of you believe that as of right now, yes, we should impose lockdowns. 32% say no, we should not impose lockdowns, and just 16% of you are not sure. Valuable information to have. But to kick off our discussions, may I ask each of you, good sirs, our panelists, to please tell us that which is uppermost in the minds of the people. What is the capacity of your state for dealing with the COVID-19 crisis? What are you doing in real terms, to get help to the poor? And what are you doing to ensure security of life and property? Your Excellency, Dr. Fayemi, if we may please start with you.
Thank you, Dr. Ogunro. And let me also thank my brother Koyin for the invitation to be part of this panel. And I welcome my brother governors and the entire audience to this Emmanuel Church webinar. Well, what is the capacity of my state? Well, as you may know, Ekiti is not one of the largest states. It's a relatively small state of about 3 million people and spread over 6,000 square meters, square miles of land size. Since this virus came to our country, which will be February 27th, 2020, we had started preparing for it even before we got any positive case in Ekiti. The minute the first case landed in Lagos, we set up our 40-person task force, which I chair. And this is a task force of both professionals in the medical field, as well as community leaders, religious leaders, political leaders in our state. And the task force has been largely responsible for driving what we're doing. And our isolation center was ready before we even had our first case. And by the time we got the first case on the 15th of March, we also had put in place the protective personal equipment. We've put in place all the materials that we needed, and we were ready. And as of today, we have 5 active cases in our state. Altogether 15 cases, 10 had been discharged, and we have 5 active cases. The capacity to deal with this and what is uppermost in the minds of our people. Your survey, the one that you just did, was actually quite interesting to me, because the sense I get from our people is really that what's uppermost in their mind is livelihoods, rather than immediate response to the health challenge. But that's understandable. But the minute we encountered the first COVID-19 related death in my state, then the people became much more concerned about their lives. And everybody, at least a larger proportion of the population, started arguing for government to do lockdown, to insist on interstate boundary lockdown, to put in place security measures, and limit the rights of citizens, relatively speaking, to just embark on their own individual approaches. So you can see the mix and match in relation to that. And the way we've dealt with our lockdown is a mixture of lockdown and freedom. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday in my state are work days. Neighborhood markets are open, but we maintain our interstate boundary lockdown, which is a general principle of the Governors Forum, by the way. The Governors Forums have a framework that we've all agreed to as governors, and we also conveyed that to the president, and that informed what he did in the last broadcast to the nation, which is 1, interstate boundary lockdown, 2, relaxation of internal lockdown in many of our states, that is freedom to move around, but with a curfew imposed, and then essential services excused. Ramping up on testing, we just started that process now. We got our mobile testing molecular laboratory today in Ekiti, and that has been a challenge because there isn't enough testing happening all over, not just in my state. And also, we have encouraged the distribution of palliatives to the citizens in my state. And over the last, if you like, 2 months of this effort, we must have distributed foods to about 100,000 households. And remember, that's a small state. That's roughly 600,000 people, because our definition of a household is, of course, 2 parents and 4 children. Of course, it may differ from household to household, but that's the average definition. And that's a chunk of our population in Ekiti. So that's basically how we dealt with it.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, so much for your input. We're going to move to Mr. Governor Sanwo-Olu. Sir, you run the 5th largest economy in Africa and one of the most populous city-states in the world. Lagos is Nigeria's financial and economic hub, and sadly, the epicenter of COVID-19 in Nigeria. Now, the approach that low and middle-income countries such as Nigeria take for responding to COVID, it needs to be quite different from that of high-income countries, as we saw previously. Due to our large informal number of workers who rely on daily wages, an approach using lockdowns may be more economically damaging than it is beneficial. So given the finite resources of each state, what trade-offs have you had to make in responding to COVID-19 in Lagos State as compared to what you imagined maybe your ideal response would have been?
Well, thank you again, Dr. Guru, and thank you to Professor Koinsola, and good evening to my brother governors on this Emmanuel Chapel webinar this evening. Thank you very much for putting this together. I think this is the 4th or 5th in series that I have had to deal with, being the epicenter in the last 2 weeks or so. But this is where we are. You said it is the 5th largest economy in Africa. Is the largest economy, obviously, in Nigeria. And you can see from the statistics given by my brother governor. So he has twice my size, but I have almost 8 times his population. So that's the kind of demography that we're dealing with. And it's true that we were the first recipients, of the index case in the country. And thereafter, we're where we are. We've crossed 2,000 in the last 8 to 10 weeks or so, and we've had about 520, 530 discharges. Sadly, we've had about 33 deaths to date, and actively we have about 1,000 still in various active stages. So your question really is, how have I been able to balance all of these challenges, given the reality of also where we find ourselves as a city-state? From the statistics you've rolled out earlier, a sizable percentage of that 300 informal economy, a sizable number of them are actually in Lagos. About 60-70% of our population are actually on the daily wage brackets, informal sector in one form or the other, MSMEs, that are recruiting, employing 1 to 5 people in all of those demography. And even all of the large corporates, all of the large consumer corporates are all here, in Lagos. This is also where you have international travel. This is where you have all the businesses around energy. You have businesses around health. You have businesses around newspaper, media. Pretty much. So it was even a difficult balance from day one. Even when we attempted to slow down the economy and to slow down movement, because we also have a huge number in terms of industry, in terms of sector of people that were considered as essential services, it also became pretty difficult for us to be able to lock down the state or the city completely. Quite a number of the goods that are leaving Lagos are going to other parts of the country. This is also where you have, the seaports, the 2-3 major seaports in the country for goods to move out of the country. So it's also where you have 60% of the petroleum products that comes into the country that needs to be distributed to other parts of the country. So in terms of even the logistics, that's what you need to deal with. So when we say lockdown, 70-80% of even essential services that needs to move around the country also still needs to take its roots, from Lagos. So that in itself presents a lot of challenges, and unfortunately, I also don't have a lot of boundaries. It's only Ogun State that is my boundary. The other boundary that I have is Atlantic Ocean, and of course, Benin, Republic of Benin, right? So all of that pressure needed to be comprehensively managed between ourselves, and Ogun State. In fact, what we have done is we've had to redefine our border posts temporarily. We've had to move into Ogun State for us to even be able to manage the border control, both on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway and even on the Jebode, Epe Expressway, just so that we can manage a lot of those logistics. So it's actually been a very, very difficult line, to keep up to, as against needing to be the epicenter while we're managing the influx of the cases coming in. I would say that maybe one of the challenges that we had, even when the incident case happened, was we didn't lock down as a nation very quickly, international travel, because 70% of international destination of this country still comes into Lagos, right? 80% of the health workers at the airport at that time were even my own staff. They were staff of Ministry of Health, and we're saying it, but these are not things that I have or we have control over, right? The seaport is an essential national asset that we didn't have control over. The airports are essential national assets that we don't have control over, right? And same with customs and all of it. So it was certainly beyond what a subnational like ourselves can deal with. And we had to start escalating some of those challenges at those early stage before we finally got the norm, to do closure. Because it was a virus that had to be imported, that had to come from outside of the country, right? In our estimate, and with also the benefit of hindsight, right? We did not lock down early. That's number one. Number two, the challenge that we saw was also data. People were walking in at that time, and we didn't have a process where to validate the data that they were dropping. And what was the data? So they filled a form in front of an health official, and we couldn't very quickly validate, which was the right telephone number, which was the proper addresses they've given. So what that meant was that contact tracing, when those cases started, was very difficult. When we get a manifest of a flight from outside of the country and was called through, it became difficult that one digit was missing out of the 11 digits of telephone numbers that they were meant to have written down, or you realize that, the address they've given, it's an incomplete address. You just say it's number 5, Ola Street where. So it speaks to the data of each one of us as a country. So, but if we had prepared ourselves as a nation where we have, unique identity, even if the person walks away, right, without unique identity, it will have been a lot easier on us to be able to do contact tracing and be able to, identify where this person. So those are some of the early challenges that in my view, made made it difficult for us to be able to hold up. But how do we strike the balance between doing a global lockdown? It was interesting to see what your statistics are, and balancing also the economy. So the economy is not only for Lagos economy, it's actually a Nigerian economy. So I shut down all the fast-moving consumer goods, that has to do, the daily products and all of it, and everywhere in Nigeria gets shut down. So it's something that we said to ourselves we needed to balance it, and we needed to be sure that we're not just killing an ant with a sledgehammer. So those are some of the challenges that I believe that we've had to contend with. But one thing that we have done well from day one was collaboration and communication. We ensure that our collaborative efforts, internally amongst our various stakeholders in Lagos, the private sector, the public sector, the ramping up, of improvement infrastructure at our various health facilities, building up of isolation centers, and communication. Communication to ensure that we transparently continue to communicate with our people, no matter how bad, no matter how tough things are. You certainly need to tell people, early days that this is not going to go off very quickly. These are the steps we need to have, and we'll continue to do that, for our people. So really, that's where we are now, but we're convinced that with all of the process we've started, right, things can only get better down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that excellent discussion, or those points that were made in terms of how we lock down, the importance of locking down as a nation earlier, reducing international travel, and looking into the states, looking specifically into Lagos states and the ways that we may feasibly lock down while ensuring that the economy is still moving. Because as you mentioned, stopping the fast-moving consumer goods immediately stopped, in many ways, parts of a large chunk of the economy. So we'll come back to talking about what we might do for not just everyday people, but how we might ensure that the formal sector, the informal sector, and everything in between is actually appropriately accounted for. I'm going to move to my next question, and I'll go into the details I discussed earlier about the McKinsey & Company reports, where they mentioned that nearly 1/3 of all workers in Africa, both the informal and formal sectors, were affected by the COVID-19 crisis. So, Engineer Sule, you, much like Governor Obaseki, you were in the private sector all of your life. Indeed, you were one of the largest employers of labor in the country. From the government side, what are you now thinking through the feasible options for saving jobs? Because that's certainly something that's front and center at on people's minds. What about my job? How can we ensure that people are going to be accounted for once this whole thing is over and they will have some jobs to receive their profit money and wages?
Thank you very much. Let me also join in thanking you actually for inviting me into this novel program, and thank my boss, Professor Konya Ajayi, for also inviting me into this. I really appreciate inviting me to be part of this. Let me also thank our chairman, the chairman of the Governors Forum, and my colleagues, including my landlord, the Governor of Lagos. This question actually will have been different if it was the Governor of Lagos asking you, because most of the private sector is in its own part of the land. Now, Nasarawa is more or less a civil service state. So the fear of job loss is not much around this side. The fear of majority of our people are farmers. So talk about lockdown, when I saw your numbers, almost about 50-50. If you had asked that question in Nasarawa state, most likely, in Nasarawa state, they will tell you almost 90% will be against lockdown, because 90% of the people that you have around here are actually people who are living day by day. So a lockdown, and then a lot of traders, that we have, who have to go out to sell before they can make a living. So people like that will definitely be against a lockdown. So now going back to your specific question, most of the time I've been in the private sector, I was actually in Lagos, not in Nasarawa state. Now that in Nasarawa state, where it is mostly civil service and agriculture, in Nasarawa, we didn't have what we call total lockdown. We had more or less a partial lockdown here in Nasarawa state. The partial lockdown is because Nasarawa has the closest proximity to the federal capital. So the moment we heard that there was an index case at the FCT, we started preparations, because I knew since almost 60–70% of the lower class workers work in Abuja but reside in Nasarawa state around Kano. So we knew we were headed for problems in that area. So we decided to lock down the border with the FCT. We locked down that border with the FCT before we locked down any other borders. And then the local government called Karu, which has the proximity, we also locked that local government out. And that's how it works for us from the beginning. So that's why we stayed for a very long time without having an index case. However, in fact, Benue, which is one state away from the FCT, had its own case. Plateau had its own case before now Nasarawa got ours. But then we have another new case in Nasarawa state. Nasarawa has a 4-year-old, that is positive, which is something new in the country, and we are just trying to manage that case at the moment because it's a very pathetic case where the parents are not positive, but the child is positive because of the neighbor that is positive. So those are the kinds of things we are doing. So I don't want to repeat what the governor of Ekiti has said. Nearly everything he mentioned are in line with what we did. We have locked down the borders, but within the states, especially being farmers, we didn't lock down. But what we did was that most of the markets, the schools, the shops, and all those places we locked down because you don't know who is coming from Abuja or who is coming from Kano, or of course who is coming from Lagos. And we have a lot of returnees from Lagos. So right now, nearly 100%, in fact, not nearly, 100% of our cases, and we have 28 at the moment, 100% of these 28 are people that return either from Lagos or they return from Kano. Only 1 or 2 maybe from Abuja, so that's the situation we have. And then our situation was compounded with a decision taken by the northern governors about the Almajiris, when we decided that the Almajiris also had to return to their various homes in order to prevent them from further exposure to this virus. When we took that decision, now some of the Almajiris returned from some of these states, tested also positive. And that's what I'm telling you about people from Kano and the rest of them. So that's the situation we have in Nasarawa state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for telling us about the current situation within Nasarawa State. And we'll go back to our discussion of a cross states, cross boundaries potential solution in terms of collaboration. But I'm going to move on to a question from the audience, actually, as we move to Your Excellency, Mr. Governor Obaseki. Now, this question asks from John Adeboyega. I wanted to know what the government is doing to ensure that the palliative being provided are getting to the real people who need it without being hijacked or diverted. Second, I wanted to know why the government cannot send palliative money using BVN. So these are questions directly from people and their actual concerns. How do they access these forms of relief? Please, Mr. Governor Obaseki, we turn to you.
Thank you very much. As for palliatives, let me just talk about the situation in Edo. First, we had to identify who do you want to give palliatives to? Who are the most affected? Who are the most vulnerable in society? Who are the most affected by this pandemic? Because everybody is affected. So it's important to categorize those who are in their need, those who are the margin, those who have just almost been pushed off the cliff as a result of this pandemic. And so what we've done in Edo State is to try and qualify those who need palliatives. And this, we decided, should be the poorest of the poor. And how do you reach these people? What we found in our, whilst we were distributing, was that the people in the community know. So for instance, when we went to a street,
I believe we may be experiencing a few technical difficulties, so we will wait for Governor Obaseki to come back online.
And offense on the street cannot be, cannot fall into the category of those.
So while we wait for his connection,
sorry. First thing is to decide on those who qualify, and the second is to decide on the method of getting to them. In the case of Edo, we're been blessed. We have a very we have a strong traditional system, and so through the community leaders, the local heads of communities, through churches, we were able to work with church workers, with community workers to identify about 100,000 families through which we were able to distribute palliatives to.
Thank you, sir.
Oh,
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. I'm not sure you heard me. I said that for us, first, it was identifying those who you think qualify. And secondly, the methods, the structures through which to get this assistance as palliatives to them. And for us in Edo State, we have, don't forget, Edo is the home of the Pentecostal movement. So we have very strong religious groups, very strong churches, and they're very well organized. So we were able to send most of our palliatives through church structures and also the traditional institutions. In every quarter, in Benin, for instance, you have someone who oversees that quarter. That's called the Odionwere. And so he knows everybody, knows practically everybody who lives on the streets or in the street or in the area. And through those structures, we were able to reach most of the people we thought deserve the palliatives we were offering as government.
Sir, I'm going to follow up with a very quick question. We've seen in some other states, they've been able to intelligently use innovative technology approaches for identifying the exact people who may need palliatives. Are we thinking of using any of such technologies, either at the state level in Edo State or potentially across the entire country?
Yes, we are. We're working with the telecom companies, for instance, the telephone companies, for instance, and we've been able to, working with a couple of them, disaggregated the callers, people who use phones from our state, and be able to decide through their spend patterns at their locations, their economic status. For instance, from a database of about 2.4 million callers in the state, we were able to disaggregate that data and found out that almost 250,000 of them did not load or spend more than 500 naira a month. Clearly, these are people who you would qualify as quite vulnerable. But because of the secrecy laws and regulations, we've not been able to get the exact details, and that's what we're currently working on. Yes, so there are innovative technologies. We also have a database of parents in our public school system, and we've been working through, just massaging that data to find those kids who have challenged or are challenged economically and to try and reach their parents. So those are some of the methods, some of the ways we try to use data that's available to reach people we describe as poor and vulnerable.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for your response. Great. Thank you so much, sir, for your response. And on that note, regarding the palliatives, we're going to ask the audience, because we like to engage very well. We're going to ask the audience a poll. You will see a poll on your screen right now, asking you simply, who do you feel is doing best on palliatives? Is it government? Do you feel that it is private sector and charities? Do you feel that it is religious groups, or is it individuals? Now, we've gotten a sense of what government is doing, and we've also heard of different private sector initiatives and charities. We are all involved in religious groups. I know Emmanuel Chapel has done quite a bit in terms of getting relief to the most vulnerable populations, but we've also seen Citizens for Citizens getting involved and engaged at the individual level. So the question is, who do you feel is doing best on providing these palliatives across the country? And we'll see our answers in just a moment. At the same time, we shall take a step back and revert back to Dr. Governor Fayemi. So at a macro level, the country's federal and state fiscal position has really changed rapidly over the past 2 months. It's very simplistic. It's too simplistic to think of COVID-19 response on a state-by-state basis, as has been mentioned previously by pretty much every governor on this panel. So since the virus does not respect borders, what might this crisis mean for collaboration across communities, for collaboration across states, and even maybe for collaboration across the countries of Africa?
You need me to respond to that?
Yes, please, sir.
Okay, I was a little bit confused because I still see your survey on the screen. Well, let me say that collaboration has been at the heart of the response strategy for COVID-19. Initially, there were disjointed efforts. States were working on their own. The federal government was working on its own via the Presidential Task Force, and the governors were learning from one another. Lagos being the pace setter, the first recipient of a COVID-19 positive case, and then the rest of us. Over the last 2 months, we had 8 meetings. Every week, governors met just to review the strategy for coping and responding to COVID-19 in our various states, and to develop a framework that is consistent and efficient across the board. Within our zones too, we have regional governors forum. So you have the Northern Governors Forum, you have the Southwest Governors from the Southeast, and we were also meeting because the propensity for spread is higher within the neighboring and contiguous states. So we also have to devise a strategy. In fact, some of the strategies that we devised at our sub-regional or zonal levels were also the things that we escalated to the national framework. You heard Governor Sule talk about dealing with the Almajiri question that came up in the Northern Governors Forum. That wasn't a decision of the Nigerian Governors Forum. That was a specific decision in response to a specific challenge. But we then started working fairly closely with the Presidential Task Force because we weren't really working with them as closely as we ought to. So what was a disparate initiative or strategy at first has become more collaborative at the level of the immediate response to COVID-19 as a health challenge. I can't hear your question. I know you're trying to ask a question.
Here we go. So I want to ask a question directly coming from the audience because Tosin has your ear now. She asks, Dr. Fayemi, thanks for sharing. With only 5 active cases, and as you consider reopening your state completely, how confident are you that Ekiti has been able to contain the virus and prevent community spread? So what's your confidence level?
Well, Fortunately, from all the evidence that we haven't even had community transmission yet in Ekiti. We've been able to trace every case to people who have come from Lagos, particularly, and lately a positive case from Katsina. So all of our cases, we could trace them. Our contact tracing could also trace people they've been with. So we haven't had community tracing, community spread. Having said that, we have not decided to relax our lockdown completely. We're not convinced that we're doing as well as we should be doing on interboundary state lockdown. And that's a big challenge for us. People are still getting in spite of all efforts that we've put on this. But what has really helped us contain spread is the fact that our people have been very responsive, even in the local communities, in the villages, because communication has been strong. When they notice somebody who has come from outside, whether a native or who's been in Lagos and just returned and managed to escape government's lockdown, we get called by the community themselves. And they point our attention to where that person is. We pick the person up, we subject the person to our quarantine experience, and then test the person. And then, of course, monitor what goes on. So that's what has helped us. I can't say we have any magic wand, but we have a very good tracing expertise, and we have a very good response strategy for those. And we've been lucky, we've not had extreme cases. Most of our cases have been asymptomatic. By the time they spend 10 days, they've already tested negative twice. We've not had anybody who required the use of a ventilator, for example, out of all the 15 cases that we've had. So I wouldn't say that our experience has been extreme, but there has been a major challenge with the informal economy, just as Governor Sule mentioned to you. And that's why I said earlier that for us in Ekiti, it's more about livelihood than life. I think we've almost come to the conclusion that we can protect our citizens, but how do we ensure that we don't destroy livelihoods in the process?
Thank you, sir, for giving that description on really focusing on the livelihoods and not destroying livelihoods. So we have our poll results on who is doing best on palliatives, and it seems that overwhelming majority, 46%, as compared to the other government, religious groups or individuals, nearly half of our attendees believe that the private sector and charities are the ones who are doing best in terms of palliatives. So I'm actually going to, as we talk of private sector, I'm going to turn to you, Mr. Governor Sanwo-Olu, because Lagos is, of course, the heart of the private sector. One of the biggest questions I'm constantly hearing by my peers, by people in the international community, by people in the everyday community is, what are you doing for business? What's happening for small and medium enterprises? How can we come out of this COVID-19 crisis better than before if we're not strengthening the stronghold of business, which are primarily SMEs in this country? So please, Mr. Governor, what do you have to say?
Thank you very much, Doc. And just to step back a little bit, you know, the moment I saw that opinion poll, I knew what the answers were going to be. You know, I had actually scored myself. I said, there's no way you're going to win this battle, right? At best, if they give you a 20 as government, you know, coming in terms of the ratio, just take it, you know. And so I wasn't surprised at all. But this is it. In our chest yet, 700,000 households are the ones that we've given palliatives to. Right? And in the same way that my colleagues have explained it, we've used all sort of channels, you know, from religious bodies to charities, to NGOs, to higher institutions, to ethnic groups, any congregation that you can see, to CDCs, to CDAs, anything, any form of congregation, you will. In fact, they got to a stage where I said they shouldn't even brand it as the state government palliative any longer, because there is this entitlement mentality that we also have. Once they see that it's from the government, everybody and anybody just gets unruly. So just go there and give it out and just be quiet about where it's coming from. But that's not the thing. The thing is, we're all doing something. And I want to commend and thank all of the private sectors. I want to thank the religious organization. I want to thank the individuals that have done much, much more than government. So we're not going to stand here and say that, I mean, we've done, you know, where we should be. But I knew that was what was going to come out, you know, from that opinion pool. Right, but to your question specifically, Chini, so one of the things we're doing is almost every 2 weeks, I usually have a meeting with the top private sector players, you know, so using LCCI and Nigerian Employers Consultative Assembly, which is NECA, which is their two umbrella bodies that they usually, you know, work with. So we usually have, you know, Zoom meeting and Microsoft, you know, every 2 weeks to review, to agree, and to ask them what are the things that they want government to do for them at the subnational, you know, my own level. And part of the things that we've taken away is that they've assured me continuously that they will keep the jobs, that they will ensure that whatever it's going to take, they will still keep the jobs. Because one of the things that I explained to them, now it's not profitability, it's sustainability. You know, just remain afloat. This year will blow over and all of us. So mention this to all your stakeholders, to all your shareholders, and let them know that it's not all about shareholder value this year again, but just let's keep our staff, let's keep our people, you know, afloat. And I've received tremendous response from them. But to go to the SMEs who are not on that platform, you know, that I've talked about, what are we doing? Part of the things that we've done on our palliative is that every SME that have had to interact with us on our Lagos Employment Trust Fund, and it's quite a number, about 45,000 by my last count, right? We've suspended their interest calculation on the loans we've given to them. We've asked all of them to do a first 3 months suspension, which I think will be coming to an end at the end of June, you know, so we suspended them. You know, that's the first thing, so that they don't have that pressure on the small loans that they've taken from the Lagos Employment Trust Fund, you know, so that's on the one. On the second part, what we're doing, which I'm sort of like, you know, giving you an insight to what is in my revised budget. There's a group of consultants that we're working with, and we're trying to very quickly be able to do an enumeration of about 100,000 to 200,000 SMEs in Lagos. So we're looking at, you know, their volume. You know, they probably will not have the full accounts yet, you know, but they also probably don't have tax records, but we're stratifying them. You know, the ones that have proper registration, the ones that have, you know, tax ID, the ones that even have an account. What are we planning to do? We're planning, and that's what I'm pushing in my revised budget. We're trying to be able to give them some sort of like a grant between 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, various. That's what I'm saying. I'm secretly open the plan that I have in my revised budget, because we realize that this sector, you know, nobody will be taking care of them. Government needs to be, you know, have their part. Government needs to be able to take care of them. People that are employing 5 people, 7 people, 8 people, they do not have the cushion. They don't have that liquidity. You know, once they don't make a sale in a month, there's really nowhere for them to go to. I mean, that's it. That it's skin and bone. You know, so we truly understand that will be a challenge for us. So the ones that are under a database, on the ones that have collected loans from the state government, we've asked that they should suspend all the loans. You know, but beyond that, like I said, we're working with 2-3 consulting firms, and we're designing a model where we'll have different. So we want their data, we want their records. You know, we're not just going to be throwing money, you know, at you. So we want to be sure that you have a tax card, you're properly registered, you have some form of bookkeeping. You know, you will get a bit more. But even if you don't have that one, if it's just the registration you have, and you can show, you know, maybe with your bank statement or something that you have some business going on, you will also qualify. So that those are the kind of strategies that we have planned, you know, once we get the budget, you know, reappraised. And we're putting in the budget about 4 to 5 billion, you know, to be able to do that. And that for us, it's a lot of money, you know, and that's what we'll be telling our citizens, that we're planning, so it's really going to be some sort of like a quasi grant, I don't want to reel out everything yet so that I don't, my people don't get upset with me, but it's something like that. Something very soft, something very more like grants, as against a loan, but something in between. And we're working, but we know that this sector, we need to come through for them. This sector, nobody will have their back, and government needs to really, really have their back. And that's one of the things we're doing. But for the big guys, like I said, we talked to them. In fact, I still had a meeting with about 25 of them yesterday, and we're seeing part of the things that we can do, to sort of like just make life a lot better so that they keep those jobs that is so, so important, today.
It's as though you read my mind and you already knew what the follow-up question was going to be. The second you mentioned the interest rates, I said he had an idea of what was coming. And that was quite a thorough answer. And I think we're looking forward to that type of support for the small and medium enterprises. And people will want to make sure that not only are we saying that these funds are available, but they can actually access them, that they will actually be able to use these things. And we'll come back again to the private sector and the larger scale development post-COVID. I have a very interesting question from Ike Agwebo in NYC. And he asks, how can we ensure that we stop brutality of enforcement? What is being done about police brutality in enforcing lockdown? And a similar question, but along different lines, was asking, is Nasarawa State government looking for a way of enforcing the use of nose masks in the state and also allow shops, non-essentials, to operate? So please, Engineer Sule, can you please provide us with what is really being done to ensure that police brutality in enforcement of these lockdown measures are not taking place? We've all seen, videos, some photographs. We won't mention names, but it's not always good things that are happening to make sure people who may not understand the gravity of the situation. So is there such a thing as compassionate response? What is taking place in your state and around the country?
Thank you very much. Before I go down to your questions on nose masks as well as enforcement and police brutality, let me also just visit what the governor of Lagos mentioned, concerning that poll that you had. I don't know where the audience, who are on that poll came from, but definitely not from Nasarawa State. Because I will tell you, in Nasarawa State, we were not that lucky to have the huge impact of palliatives, from either the private sector or from the religious bodies also that they had given. We thank all those who came and contributed. But because of the absence of some of those industries also, from the car COVID, we received, some materials, and then we received some food items, which we are still receiving. Up till this moment, we have not shared any. Also, if you look at it from the funding, since we came in, that you will see religious bodies, traditional rulers maybe have contributed about 10% of what we have been able to receive so far. And then the car COVID, the private sector, and the rest of that, maybe about 20%. So 70% came from government, for us in the State. So we use the resources that we had. I think it's very clear that I put that record straight. Because Nasarawa State has not received anything either from the federal government so far, or even from anybody, when we come to that. So I wanted to make that a little bit clear in case there are audience, from Nasarawa State, so they understand it from that angle. Now, coming back to police brutality, that you have mentioned, it is a very big area of concern. I had to drive on my own, to some of these places where we had checkpoints. And there were some checkpoints that were mounted that were unnecessary. I had to physically dismount some of those checkpoints and ask them, this checkpoint doesn't make sense. Allow the motorists just to go ahead and pass and proceed to their various destinations. I had to do that. Then we have an excellent police commissioner here in Nasarawa State, the CP Lonje. Lonje is a very good pastor, who believes very strongly also against all this brutality and unfairness. as well as also we have very good military commandant, 177, as well as other people from the DSS, our commandant, and the civil defense. All of them are interested in ensuring that in case there is any brutality, either from the police, from the army, or any of the agencies, people should go ahead this era of social media, record, send to them, and they will take action. And we had one that was taken right between Karu and Kefi. When it was taken, there were some military guys that were having something like that. It was sent to the commandant. He ran to the side. They picked the military guys. They went and locked them up, at the camp. And those are the kind of things that we have done. So we haven't seen much of this brutality here in Nasarawa State. Now, coming back to what you say about the nose mask, we decided not to make it compulsory from the beginning because we had not bought enough to distribute. So it was only this week, that we have received all the nose masks that we have ordered, and therefore we decided to make it compulsory now. So in fact, we're getting ready to relax some of our warships, as long as people will wear their nose masks and maintain the social distancing. So we can allow people also to relax some of these restrictions that we are having. So now we are making it compulsory, but only when we are able to receive it. Because here in Nasarawa, you can make it compulsory and find somebody that will tell you, I don't have 500 naira or 300 naira to buy the nose mask. So how do you do? Now police brutality will come in. Thank you very much.
So, sir, you've answered, you've led our discussion in the direction I wanted it to go. We're going to put up a poll now asking everybody, as you again come back to respond, should religious gatherings be allowed? Now, Engineer Sule just mentioned that it is possible we will open, it is possible for us to reopen churches, to reopen mosques, to reopen different sorts of religious gatherings if people are able to take the right precautions. Excuse me, I promise I don't have anything, it's just a cough. If people are able to take the right precautions. So now, if we can have nose masks, if we have proper hand washing, proper sanitizing, and potentially proper social distancing during these religious gatherings, should they be allowed to open again? I will allow everybody some time to please vote yes or vote no. Should religious gatherings be allowed? And we will put up the findings of this question shortly. Now, the next question I have is really focused, after this question, I'm going to go back more generally and ask some questions about what the future looks like. And I'll allow each of you governors to please answer the questions as you deem fit. But I have one final formal question for our Governor Obaseki. So what do you believe that the future currently looks like for the everyday man, woman, and child in your state? So at a micro level, every person's financial situation has really been affected due to the lockdowns and the restriction of movement. So you are indeed a private sector man that has brought that discipline to governance. So from your perspective, what does the future look like, considering the things that have taken place, such as the drop in commodities pricing? We all know that the price of crude oil today is not what our country had budgeted it to be. We know that commodities all around the continent of Africa have really gone down. So the financial constraints, both at the macro level across the country and at the micro level for individuals, is not what we expected. What do you see the future being?
In thinking about the future, let's look at the future first in a very short term and a much longer term. With what has been described as the new normal. The new normal for Nigeria will be one in which we cannot rely on revenues from crude oil to finance our budgets and our economic existence. So in the short term, it's likely to be very, very difficult as we make those necessary adjustments for the future. We're likely to see an increase in food prices. We're likely to see shortages in food supplies, a lot of social hardships in the short run. in the short run. But depending on what we as a nation and we do as individual states, we may be able to use this new normal as the opportunity to reset our country. If you recall, and from what you have read, this country was much better organized, was a greater country when we did not have to depend on revenues from one single product. For us in Edo State, we see an opportunity in the long term. Fortunately, we started the plans to look to diversify the economy, to look at other areas that will generate revenues for us. We're fortunate, we're in the rainforests. We're revamping oil palm. We're revamping agriculture in general, particularly those crops that have high value crops. We are emphasizing food supply. We're emphasizing services because of our unique location as a hub, a transportation hub. And we're emphasizing a knowledge economy, to just benefit and take advantage of the investments we have been making in education. So to answer your question in summary, the short term is going to be difficult, quite difficult. We're likely to see a lot of social upheavals, lots of insecurity, but with the quality of leadership, particularly at the state level that's emerging, I'm sure myself and my colleagues will be able to provide the leadership required to ensure we stabilize society, begin to make citizens understand that it's now time for hard work, that government must now truly create the enabling environment for people to express themselves, for people to go about doing the things they can do best, and to allow the private sector now thrive to remove the bottlenecks that inhibited growth and production in our country. So for us in Edo State, we're clear that the way to go in the short term is to continue to provide palliatives and support to improve the business environment and begin to make the investments for the long term.
Thank you, sir. That's a great segue into opening the floor, opening the discussion. And our poll shows that for religious gatherings, a great number of people, 78% say no, absolutely not. Religious gatherings should not be allowed at this particular point in time. So as we think of public spaces, religious gatherings, let's also think about education. So Oluwatoyin H.O. has posed us a question, and I open this question up to everybody on the panel, all of you good sirs. What plans are being made to get quality education in children in public schools, like those being done in private schools, as opposed to what's happening now, to using the TV and radio as being that is being done now, so that they don't end up being sucked into crime? So again, Oluwatoyin H.O.'s question is, how do we ensure that those children in the most vulnerable or lowest income populations are able to get the same access to quality education as those children who may have, who may be doing internet online learning, who may have the capacity to constantly be in touch with their teachers and other educated? What about education?
Well, Dr. Okoro, at the end of the day, education is really where this all ought to start from. And I can tell you, at least the governors you have on this panel, I can tell you that they're all very passionate about education. You had Governor Baseki talk about knowledge economy. It may well be the case that right now, what is happening in many of our states is school on air, which is basically TV, radio used for public schools. As against what some of the private schools have started doing, Google Online, and a whole range of online teaching facilities. But that's also why in every crisis, you would always have an opportunity. You may have read or heard what I did yesterday in my state when I signed an executive order to crash right-of-way fees. And there's only one reason why I did that. If I'm going to attract some of the people that my brother Jide is holding on to in Lagos because of the attraction of Lagos, then I cannot be charging the same right-of-way fees that he charges. I have to look for a creative and innovative way to improve the knowledge economy in my state, which is not as competitive as Lagos. And you have a cheaper labor workforce, you have a probably much better educated labor, because that's all we do. We just read in my state. And we want to improve that to make our state the destination. So skills development, at the end of the day, is going to be the opportunity that comes out of this crisis. A very well-educated population with skills to sell for the fourth industrial revolution. So I think that's where this is all going. That's what we're doing. But for now, it's focused on school on air initiatives, but it needs to go beyond that.
And that's precisely the point. How do we go beyond that? So what's taking place right now? The rest of the world constantly talks about digitization. This COVID-19 crisis is going to force us to accelerate the rate of digitization. But many Nigerians are going to complain, do I even have access to basic internet? What are we thinking through in terms of using technology, ensuring that we're accelerating digitization to be able to do things such as flatten the playing field, ensure that maybe a child in your state will have access to internet education and opportunities that they may have otherwise have gone to somebody who is in Lagos State or abroad. The internet is providing knowledge and information to millions of people across the world. And Nigeria has some of the most intelligent people in the world. How do we empower our people digitally to make them ready for this digital revolution? And I open this question again to everybody on the panel. Excuse me, Mr. Governor Sanwo-Olu, I'm also looking at you because digitization is a big deal for all of the technology entrepreneurs that may be sitting in Lagos. So please, everybody on the panel, what are we doing to ensure digitization of healthcare, of education, and the basic rights that people deserve in order for Nigeria to keep up with the rest of the world?
Okay, so I reckon this is it's for me.
Question for everybody, because it's the question that really matters.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll probably just start off with where my chairman of Governors Forum ended, my brother Governor Fayemi, about the great initiative of crashing, the right of way to ensure that, telcos, and all IHS, they all come around to lay their fiber and all of it. And so for us in Lagos, we also realize that we cannot sit back and believe because the economy is here, the numbers are here, we're just going to take people for granted. No, we need to continue to create an atmosphere and an environment where we know competition is everywhere. It's on the remaining state. So we need to also continue to remain competitive so that they don't also take the business away from us. So part of the things we've also done is to see what we call, we're doing what we call a metro fiber optics. So we're actually gridding the whole city, by fiber. So we are not waiting for the telcos to come and give us a need to say that I want right of way for this 500 kilometers or for these 300 kilometers based on their own business proposal or their own business need. What we're doing is we're putting our own destiny in our hands. So we're gridding the whole city. So we're starting a 3,000 kilometer fiber lane. We're gridding the city, right? And we're creating the right of way already. So doing that, meaning that we're going to have ducts being laid at the expense of our partners, right? So that when the telcos now finally do come up, right, the right of way is there. The ducts have been created. They just swing their fiber there, and in no time, we're good to go. That's the only way where you can wrap up, internet capability and technology can be available, to everyone. So we have taken up that initiative, and we're laying the first set of 3,000 kilometers. And after that phase one, we're doing the next 3,000 kilometers. But what are we doing with this first 3,000 kilometers? We're ensuring that with the partners we're working with, they're dropping the fiber in all of our public schools. They're dropping the fiber in all of our public hospitals, in all of our public libraries, and in all of our public institutions that we consider, places of learning or health, so that it becomes affordable and accessible, for our people. Because like you rightly said, maybe not all of our public schools will have the capability to do the online that is being done in all of the states now. So we needed to create that infrastructure capability for our own public schools. So that's the kind of agreement or arrangement we currently have now. And so it will just be a last mile fee. So we're not waiting for the telcos to have a 5-year plan or a 6-year plan. And the plan of telco 1 might be different from the plan of telco 2, from the plan of telco 3. So we are actually laying, the grid for them, and we're creating, what we call, a dock for all of them, so that once they're ready, the fiber is there. And we have the 2 docks that we are going to use to stimulate that entire investment. And we have it all, to our schools and to our hospitals, because we believe that that's the future. Data and data infrastructure is also the way to go. That's where all of us are today now. That's the only way you and I can see each other. And it's the new us, it's the new tomorrow that we see today, right? And that's where all of us need to be sure that we're all preparing for it, and we can create that environment for our kids of tomorrow in school, in health, and in all public places. And so that's one of the things we're doing. And we know that we cannot but be ready for that future, which is actually here today now.
So maybe I could come in.
Yes, please.
Yes, for us in Edo, I'm sure you've heard about the award-winning Edo Best, which means Edo Basic Education Sector Transformation Plan. And what we've done over the last 3 years, working with partners, is to utilize technology in transforming basic education. Last term, I had 20,000 children moved from private schools into the public school system to join the almost 250,000 kids I already have in a public school system. And why did that happen? It happened because we, partnering with a technology company, have been able to utilize technology to first govern our basic school systems and also introduce learning. So the kids are now learning using technology platforms. And the way it works is first training the teachers. So we've trained about 11,500 teachers in our basic school system. They all have handheld devices. Their lesson notes are loaded into those devices and connected to a portal. So I can tell when a teacher is in class, because that teacher should have signed in the morning. I can tell if a teacher completed their lesson notes for the day, because the system tells me that. And can also tell how each child in my public school system is doing in school. And this is, because we've, decided a couple of years ago to just move and utilize available technology to ensure that we make the kids learn. And that's been, very useful. So today we have a version called Edo Best at Home, where the kids, sit at home into all the groups. They can dial into the Edo Best portal, download their quizzes, do their lessons, and their teachers, they are all in WhatsApp groups with their teachers. The challenge is to try and get smartphones to the parents of those kids who are disadvantaged. But so we've always realized that technology is the way to go. And it's important to also have the technology infrastructure. So a couple of years ago, we were able to partner with Main One and Facebook. And we've constructed about 400 kilometers of fiber around Benin City, the metropolitan Benin City. So we're all connected. We have very, robust fiber connection. Digital healthcare, all our primary healthcare institutions now have technology installed in them where the health workers are trained to just go step by step using the technology to attend to parents. So I can tell you from the portal on my desk how many women attended antenatal clinics in every local government in the state. So, well, we just need to get a lot more investment in there to expand.
Fantastic. And that question around healthcare. So I have to be honest about my own bias. I've worked in healthcare my whole life. I'm a healthcare fanatic. My life is committed to ensuring that we have accessible, affordable, quality healthcare for the everyday African man, woman, and child. And it seems that other people have this question around healthcare and digitization. So for example, an organization, a company called Helium Health recently raised about $10 million in order to provide electronic medical record services across Africa. Now, the team at Helium, I've known them for quite a while, and they've been working with many, both private and public hospitals across Nigeria. And what usually happens is they're ready for the digitization part, but once they get to the hospital, the staff within the PHCs or even the private hospital don't always have a clear idea of what to do. So it's both the preparedness of staff members as well as the infrastructure behind it. And along these lines, Yeti, one of the audience members, is asking, thank you. My question is about primary healthcare during and after COVID. How is the government working towards ensuring primary healthcare and the healthcare system is actually strengthened? Now, I've worked at the Federal Ministry of Health for some time. I've worked in the private health sector for quite some time. And we are constantly trying, but we are under-resourced. Private sector can only do so much. So what are state governments doing to actually make sure that in the future, when pandemics like this happen again, and it's fairly certain that another pandemic will take place in the future as the world becomes, as we increasingly globalize, how are we going to be ready? Will people actually be able to go to their local PHC and maybe get a test? Will they be able to go to their local secondary care facility and maybe get taken care of? Do we even have proper planning for isolation wards? What are we going to do about the healthcare infrastructure, not just now, but our preparedness in the future? Because it's clear, as compared to some of the more developed countries, we were simply not ready for this COVID-19. How will we be ready in the future? Again, this is open to all of the panelists, every single.
If you don't mind.
You. Well, okay.
Yeah, I was trying to say, actually, she didn't ask me about digital technology, and I was trying to make contribution on that. But I think you can go ahead, Sam, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think you should still answer your digital technology initiative. I think it's important.
Yes, please, Engineer Sule, please answer the question.
Well, I'm looking at the time. We have just very few minutes before we go for iftar, and I know you are trying to finish by 6:30. Now, on the digital technology, like you have mentioned, and I will pick up from where the governor of Edo stopped. First is about the education itself. As you all know, maybe for some of us who live in the US and understand what is happening, in California, digital economy, I think, is the way to go. And every one of us should start thinking in that direction. And I'm talking to you from the point of being an engineer, knowing clearly, that today's world, both industries, government, this has to be direction. So what we decided in Nasarawa State, the first thing is to even get the education first. Majority of our people, were not taking ICT as well as digital technology anything serious at all. So when we came in, we decided to empower. I came in and made something that what they call e-libraries. And the e-libraries were just meant for a place where you can just read e-books, and that's all about. And we decided that now is an opportunity, to now start getting education from those other areas, so people understand that. We now consolidated the idea of our own, our revenue, to go also in that direction. When I came in, there was nothing like TSA, you know, we use that. So now people are able to see, we are able to see a lot when it comes to area of security. Security is a major thing in the northern part of the country. COVID-19 is a killer, it's a big problem. But for me in Nasarawa today, I'm more worried about security than I'm worried about COVID-19, let me be honest with you. You know, so we now decided we have to use digital technology to look at the area of security, you know, and we are able now to track kidnappings and things like that, you know, to follow from one area to another and be able to identify that. When it comes to the investment, you know, in the hardware and the software, we have also participated, especially mostly around the schools. You know, I wouldn't lie to you that we have anything to do with fiber optics, you know, distribution and bearing around the state. So we allow the big players, you know, to be able to do that. But for us, our investments are more towards education. And that is where we are going right away into empowering the people, the civil service itself, you know, the healthcare, like you have mentioned. We bought into the primary healthcare under one roof, you know, along with our chairman, the governor of Ekiti, you know, when we went to Seattle, Washington, you know, to do all that. So I think that's the direction that's just a little contribution that I have. I'm watching at the time, I'm rushing on this. So thank you very much.
Yes, and thank you for being respectful of time. And I also have to be very respectful of everybody's time. We are only 5 minutes away from 6:30, and we must respect our Muslim brothers and sisters who will need to get going very soon. So I ask all of you good sirs, you governors, can you please give a very quick 30-second closing remarks, and we'll be able to wrap up on time.
Thank you very much, Doc. Just two things, since it's on education too. Just to acknowledge that Edo has done very well, and I'm just less than a year old, so I don't need to reinvent it. I've copied them very, very well, and I'm doing double what they've done. Well, he's done about 11,000. I'm planning to do 22,000. I have over 20,000, handheld, mobile phones now, and I have a lot more internet capability. So he started it. There's no doubt about that. But like I said, we all can collaborate, and we're also doing the same thing in a greater and a bigger scale in Lagos for our public primary school students and teachers. And we are also still taking it to the secondary school. So it's really still part of, e-education, and ensuring our kids, have access to everything they need to have access to, getting into the future. So yes, I will give the commendation to Governor Obaseki, who, we peeped into what he has done, and we are doing it in a bigger and a more, in a bigger form. Also to talk about the helium health, well, Bola Tito is working with us right now just to continue to engage her around and preparing us for what we call emergency health preparedness, So we have a database that we're working together with Helium Health and see how we can use that database that we're generating today to be able to plan what our requirements will be in the 5 years and the 10 years, ahead. And for us, being able to even be able to position for pandemics like this is to continue to see how we make a lot more investment in research and development. So out of our infectious disease hospital, we're going to be building, an institute of infectious disease center. We're going to be building, properly constructed isolation centers that we just need to scale up the capability in terms of infrastructure and build a lot of redundancy, and just hope that if anything like this do occur again, right, you are ready for it. And I'm sure that we have one of the biggest biosecurity lab, in the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa, is for us to also be able to scale up those kind of labs into a proper R&D center where, we can very quickly respond to pandemics like this. It's true that we don't have resource enough for all of us, but really it's for, like the commitment I've given, right, is year on year to increase my budget allocation on the health sector side and see how we can wrap up that to about 18 to 20%, in the next 1 or 2 years, which I'm sure you'll be happy with, hearing that we will deliberately, be putting a lot more infrastructure in that sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. So
Can I
please, Yes, can we please, we only have about 1 minute left and I very much like to stick to time. So if everybody can give a very rapid 10-second takeaway point, maybe a word of encouragement.
Thank you very much. COVID-19 is perhaps one of the greatest opportunities we'll have in our lifetime to fix this country. For us, COVID-19 just gives us an opportunity to press the reset button. We should be optimistic. We should be upbeat. If you just sit back and reflect over what has happened, in the last 8 weeks in our lives, we now need to understand what is important, and then stick to those things that are important and commit to those things that are important. I'm very optimistic that this gives us an opportunity to reflect on ourselves and reflect on the country and move forward in the direction we should.
Thank you. Governor Fayemi, please, your closing remarks.
Let me first say that what you've seen is a representation of what our governors are doing. And there is a lot of peer learning, a lot of peer review that is happening, particularly in the health sector. Because when we do meet, that is what we do. What is Edo doing better than Lagos that we can all learn from? What's Lagos doing that Sokoto can learn from? That's at the basic level of what is happening, not just in healthcare, but in governance. But what this has given us an opportunity to do is to have a better joined up strategy all the time. When we have pandemics will not go away. Even if they do, they will become endemic, and we'll still have them in our environment, and we still need to respond to that. So governors are committed to rebuild the deficit of trust, because we do have that. That's what your poll showed. In spite of all the work that is going on, the populace do not necessarily believe that we're doing enough. And we need to continue to earn their trust. And governors that you've seen have demonstrated what they're doing in their various states. We're rebuilding our primary health centers, rebuilding general hospitals, even delving into tertiary healthcare. And that's the way to go. And we will continue to give our best to our people. Thank you for having us on your program.
Thank you so much, sir.
And I will just actually conclude also by saying thank you to you for inviting us. Thank you to Professor Konya Ajayi actually for inviting us and putting this program together. I'm not going to repeat. I think the governors, one of the best things that has happened is the fact that the governors have a leadership, and this leadership is given the governors a sense of direction, sense of focus. And sometimes you have some governors, like Governor Obaseki has called me a few times to say, what area of help do you need? Can I help you in this area? And I think this is wonderful. So I think one thing that you are going to see is that the moment COVID-19 is over, you are going to see a lot of improvement. Every governor is interested now in buying ventilators, setting up centers, improving healthcare. So I think you are going to see a lot of that. It's unfortunate that a negative thing has to cause us to improve, but we are going to see a lot of improvement. Thank you very much.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you all so much for your time. Many thanks to you and everybody in the audience. We at Emmanuel Chapel ask you to please tune in next week for the 6th webinar in our series. We thank you all for your time. We hope you enjoyed the discussion, and we pray everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. God bless you and good night.
Thank you. Thank you.